The cruelest thing a person can do is leave right when you stop pretending to be strong. The rain had started before sunrise and never seemed to let up, turning the gray Chicago sky into a ceiling of endless sorrow. Ava Johnson stood beneath a black umbrella outside a small brick church on the south side, greeting relatives she had not seen in years and neighbors who remembered her mother long before life became difficult. The funeral flowers were modest. The parking lot was half full. There were no cameras, no influential guests, and no powerful people offering condolences. Just ordinary people showing up for a woman who had spent her life helping others. Ava thanked each person with a tired smile, but her eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who had not truly slept in weeks. Her mother, Denise Johnson, had passed away quietly after a long illness, leaving behind a daughter who suddenly felt as though the ground beneath her life had disappeared. Inside the church, soft piano music drifted through the sanctuary while family members found their seats. Ava remained near the entrance, glancing toward the parking lot every few minutes. She knew she should stop hoping. She knew she should stop checking. Yet part of her still believed Ethan Walker would come. For 7 years, Ethan had been her husband. For 7 years, she had stood beside him through layoffs, business failures, and endless nights when he doubted himself. She had believed marriage meant staying when things became difficult. But difficulty had a way of revealing which promises were real and which ones were only convenient. At 10:14 a.m., a black luxury SUV finally pulled into the parking lot. Ava's heart lifted before she could stop it. Ethan stepped out wearing a charcoal overcoat and dark sunglasses. For a moment, she almost felt relief. Then she noticed he had come alone. No flowers, no sympathy card, no expression of grief. He looked like a man arriving for a meeting he wished had been canceled. Ethan approached slowly while distant thunder rolled across the city. "I'm sorry about your mother," he said. His voice was calm, polite, and painfully detached. Ava stared at him, searching for the men she once knew. "She loved you," Ava replied quietly. Ethan nodded but said nothing. The silence stretched between them. Finally, he exhaled and glanced away. "Ava, there's something we need to discuss." She felt a strange chill despite the warm summer rain. "Today?" Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. "There's never a good time." The words landed heavily. Ava already knew what was coming before he spoke again. For months, she had watched him drift farther away. Longer work trips, shorter conversations, increasing impatience whenever she mentioned hospital bills or her mother's treatments. The man who once promised forever had gradually become someone who viewed hardship as an inconvenience. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and handed her a sealed envelope. Ava looked down at it without touching it. She did not need to open it. She understood. "You're leaving," she whispered. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I can't keep living like this." Ava laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Living like what?" "Always surviving," he answered. "Always struggling. Always carrying problems that never end." Rain tapped against the umbrella between them. Ava felt her chest tighten, but she refused to cry. "Not here. Not now. My mother died 3 days ago," she said. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. "I know. And this is when you chose to do it." He said nothing. That silence told her everything. Across the parking lot, church bells began ringing, signaling the start of the service. People were entering the building. No one noticed the quiet collapse taking place beside the sidewalk. Ava finally accepted the envelope. Ethan looked relieved, and somehow that hurt more than anything else. "Goodbye, Ava," he said. Then he turned and walked away. She watched him disappear into the rain without looking back once. By the time the funeral ended that afternoon, Ethan Walker was gone from her life. 3 days later, Ava vanished from everyone else's too. For a while, people searched for Ava Johnson. At first it was out of concern. Her cousin called every few days. Neighbors from the church left messages she never returned. Even the landlord of her small apartment knocked twice before, finally giving up. Then concern slowly became curiosity, and curiosity eventually became silence. 6 months after Denise Johnson's funeral, most people stopped asking where Ava had gone. Chicago moved on the way cities always do. New stories replaced old ones. New struggles demanded attention. Ava became a memory attached to a difficult season that nobody wanted to revisit. Ethan Walker certainly did not. By the following spring, his life looked exactly the way he had imagined it would. His consulting firm had secured several major contracts. He moved into a luxury high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. Photographs of rooftop dinners and networking events began appearing across social media. People commented about his success, his discipline, and his bright future. Few remembered the woman who had stood beside him before any of it happened. Ethan rarely mentioned Ava anymore. Whenever her name surfaced, he offered the same careful response. He would smile politely and say they had simply grown apart. It was easier than explaining the truth. One evening, while attending a charity fundraiser downtown, Ethan overheard someone mention Ava unexpectedly. The conversation came from two women standing near the dessert table. "Did anyone ever hear what happened to her?" one asked quietly. The other shook her head. "No. She disappeared completely." Ethan felt an uncomfortable tension in his chest, but quickly dismissed it. He told himself it no longer mattered. People left relationships every day. People started over every day. Ava had probably moved somewhere else. She had probably found a new job. She had probably rebuilt her life. The assumptions comforted him because they required no effort. Yet what Ethan did not know was that Ava had vanished for a reason. 3 days after the funeral, she had packed everything she owned into a rented 12-foot moving truck. There had been no dramatic farewell, no social media announcement, no message explaining where she was going. She sold furniture she could not afford to transport. She donated clothes she no longer needed. Then she drove west alone before sunrise with less than $3,000 in her bank account and no clear destination beyond a single opportunity she had almost ignored. Months earlier, while sitting beside her mother's hospital bed, Ava had submitted an application for a competitive leadership fellowship focused on community redevelopment and economic innovation. She never expected to be selected. At the time, she was exhausted, overwhelmed, and emotionally drained. After Ethan left, she nearly forgot she had applied at all. Then, 1 week after the funeral, an acceptance letter arrived in her inbox. The fellowship was based in Seattle. It offered housing, professional training, and access to some of the most influential business mentors in the country. Most importantly, it offered distance. Distance from memories. Distance from judgment. Distance from everyone who had watched her life fall apart. Ava accepted within 24 hours. During her first year in Seattle, she worked harder than she ever had before. While others treated the fellowship like a stepping stone, she treated it like survival. She attended every seminar. She volunteered for every project. She studied late into the night after everyone else had gone home. There were evenings when grief still arrived unexpectedly. Certain songs reminded her of her mother. Certain streets reminded her of Ethan. But instead of letting those memories stop her, she carried them forward. Nobody in Seattle knew her history. Nobody knew about the funeral. Nobody knew about the divorce papers handed to her in the rain. They only knew the woman who kept showing up prepared. The woman who refused to quit. 2 years later, even her closest colleagues knew surprisingly little about her personal life. And that was exactly how Ava wanted it. Back in Chicago, Ethan continued building the future he had chosen. He never realized that somewhere nearly 2,000 miles away, the woman he left behind was becoming someone the world would soon be unable to ignore. 3 years after Ava Johnson disappeared from Chicago, her name suddenly began appearing in places where nobody expected it. The first mention came quietly. A business publication covering urban redevelopment projects released an article about a groundbreaking economic initiative transforming several neglected neighborhoods across the Pacific Northwest. Buried halfway through the report was a quote from an executive identified only as A. Johnson. Few people noticed. Fewer cared. But over the following months, the same name appeared again. Then again. Major investors began discussing a rapidly growing development company known for turning overlooked communities into thriving commercial districts without forcing long-time residents out. Local governments praised the model. Economic analysts praised the numbers. Journalists praised the vision. Yet almost nobody had actually seen the woman behind it. Ava rarely attended interviews. She declined magazine profiles. She avoided social media completely. The mystery only made people more curious. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Ethan Walker was enjoying what appeared to be the most successful period of his career. At 38, he had become a respected consultant with national clients and a growing reputation. His calendar was filled with conferences, investor dinners, and speaking engagements. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Yet perfection has a strange way of becoming ordinary once you finally achieve it. One Thursday evening, Ethan attended a private networking reception on the 72nd floor of a downtown skyscraper. The event gathered executives, investors, and public officials from across the country. Conversations flowed easily beneath floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Ethan moved comfortably through the crowd until he overheard a discussion that unexpectedly caught his attention. Two venture capital executives stood nearby, speaking in lowered voices. "The deal is almost finalized," one said. "If it closes, it will be one of the largest redevelopment acquisitions in the country this year." The other nodded. "Everyone wants a meeting with Johnson." Ethan barely reacted at first. Johnson was a common name. Then he heard the next sentence. 3 years ago, nobody even knew who she was. Now she is controlling projects worth nearly $1 billion. Ethan glanced toward them instinctively. "Who are you talking about?" he asked. "One of." The executive smiled. "Ava Johnson." The name struck him with surprising force. For a second, he thought he must have misheard. "Ava Johnson?" he repeated. "You know her?" the executive asked. Ethan hesitated. "Not recently." The man laughed. "Well, good luck finding her now. Half the investment world is trying." Ethan forced a polite smile, but the conversation lingered in his mind long after it ended. Later that night, curiosity got the better of him. Sitting alone in his apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, he opened his laptop and searched her name. What he found unsettled him. Article after article referenced major projects connected to Ava Johnson. Community revitalization programs, affordable housing partnerships, technology hubs, workforce development initiatives. The numbers attached to her ventures were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars. National partnerships, government endorsements. Yet every article seemed to share one unusual detail. There were almost no photographs, no interviews, no personal profiles. It was as though she existed everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. He remembered the woman standing in the rain outside the church. The woman carrying funeral expenses and grief at the same time. The woman he convinced himself would simply start over somewhere quietly. Instead, she had become a mystery powerful enough to command attention across the country. As midnight approached, Ethan closed the laptop but could not shake the feeling growing inside him. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering not where Ava had gone, but who she had become. And thousands of miles away in Seattle, a black SUV pulled up outside a private aviation terminal as Ava stepped out wearing a tailored Navy coat. Waiting beside the aircraft stood one of the most influential business leaders in the world, and the moment he saw her, his expression immediately softened into a smile. The man waiting beside the aircraft was Lucas Sinclair. At 34 years old, he had already become one of the most influential business leaders in the world. Financial magazines called him a visionary. News networks followed every major acquisition he made. Investors watched his decisions as if they were market forecasts. Yet when Ava Johnson approached across the private terminal, Lucas greeted her with the same quiet respect he had shown from the very beginning. "You are late by exactly 3 minutes," he said with a small smile. Ava glanced at her watch. "Traffic. That excuse works in Seattle. It does not work at a private airport." She laughed softly, and for a brief moment looked less like the powerful executive whose projects were transforming entire cities and more like the woman who had spent years rebuilding herself one careful step at a time. They boarded the aircraft together and settled into a meeting that would determine the future of a multi-state redevelopment initiative worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To outside observers, Lucas and Ava appeared inseparable professionally. Their names were increasingly linked across business publications. Analysts speculated about partnerships. Journalists tried unsuccessfully to secure interviews. Yet neither of them commented publicly. The mystery only continued growing. Back in Chicago, Ethan Walker found himself doing something he had not done in years. He was thinking about Ava. At first, he told himself it was simple curiosity. Anyone would be surprised to learn that an ex-spouse had become nationally influential. But curiosity slowly evolved into something harder to explain. He began reading every article mentioning her projects. He searched corporate filings. He watched conference recordings hoping she might appear. Instead, he found only fragments. A quote here, a project announcement there, an occasional photograph from a distance where her face was barely visible. The more successful she became, the less accessible she seemed. One afternoon, Ethan attended an industry conference in Denver. During a networking session, he overheard several executives discussing an upcoming redevelopment summit scheduled for New York City. The event would gather investors, government officials, and major developers from around the world. One speaker immediately caught Ethan's attention. Ava Johnson. He read the announcement twice just to make sure. For the first time in 3 years, she was scheduled to appear publicly. Ethan stared at the screen longer than necessary. A strange feeling settled over him. Anticipation mixed with uncertainty. He could not remember the last time someone else's appearance at a conference had mattered to him. Thousands of miles away, Ava sat inside a glass conference room overlooking Elliott Bay while reviewing final presentation materials. Her company had expanded far beyond anything she imagined during those difficult months after leaving Chicago. Entire communities had benefited from projects she helped create. Families had access to affordable housing. Small businesses had received support. Local economies were growing. The work mattered. Yet success had changed her in unexpected ways. She had become more confident, certainly, more influential, more financially secure, but she had also become far more protective of her peace. During a break between meetings, Lucas joined her near the windows. "You have been unusually quiet today," he observed. Ava smiled faintly. "Just thinking. About New York?" She nodded. Lucas studied her carefully. "You know people will talk. They always do. This time they will talk even more." Ava looked out toward the water. She understood exactly what he meant. The summit would place her in front of cameras, investors, and industry leaders. It would also place her back into a world connected to people who once knew her when everything was falling apart. Lucas folded his arms. "Are you nervous?" Ava considered the question before answering. "No." Then she smiled slightly. "But I am curious." Because somewhere deep down, she suspected the past was about to reappear. And for the first time, she was no longer the person it had left behind. The weeks leading up to the New York summit became some of the busiest of Ava Johnson's career. Invitations arrived daily. Interview requests filled her inbox. Industry leaders wanted private meetings. Investors wanted partnerships. Journalists wanted her story. Ava declined almost all of them. The attention never interested her as much as the work itself. That alone made her unusual in a world where many people spent as much energy managing appearances as building results. One afternoon, she stood inside a renovated community center in Tacoma, Washington, speaking with local business owners whose storefronts had survived because of one of her redevelopment programs. An elderly shop owner shook her hand and said, "You did not just improve the neighborhood. You gave people a reason to believe in it again." Ava thanked him quietly, but those words stayed with her long after the meeting ended. Years earlier, she had measured success differently. Back then, success meant being accepted. It meant proving she belonged. It meant earning approval from people who rarely offered it. Now success looked very different. It looked like families keeping their homes. It looked like small businesses growing. It looked like opportunity reaching people who had been overlooked. That perspective was one of the reasons Lucas Sinclair respected her so deeply. Later that evening, Lucas invited Ava to dinner at a private restaurant overlooking the Seattle waterfront. The room was elegant but understated, the kind of place where conversations mattered more than status symbols. As they reviewed documents for the upcoming summit, Lucas suddenly closed the folder in front of him. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Ava looked up. "When have you ever needed permission?" Lucas smiled. "Fair point." He leaned back slightly. "Do you ever regret disappearing?" Ava considered the question carefully. Through the windows behind him, ferries crossed the dark water beneath a sky streaked with fading orange light. "No," she answered. "I regret the reasons I felt I had to disappear, but not the decision itself." Lucas nodded slowly. He seemed to understand exactly what she meant. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he said something that surprised her. "Most people think resilience means surviving difficult circumstances." Ava raised an eyebrow. "And I think resilience is refusing to become bitter after surviving them." The words lingered between them. Ava looked down briefly. Few people understood her journey well enough to recognize that truth. Many saw the success. Few understood the cost. Across the country, Ethan Walker was becoming increasingly obsessed with learning more about the woman he had once believed he understood completely. What unsettled him most was not Ava's success. It was the fact that every new detail seemed to reveal someone he no longer recognized. One evening, he attended a private investor gathering where several attendees discussed Ava's upcoming appearance in New York. Ethan listened quietly as they spoke about her with admiration. "She is probably the most influential redevelopment strategist in the country right now," one executive said. Another nodded. "And somehow she still manages to stay out of the spotlight." Ethan stared into his drink. Years ago, people rarely spoke about Ava when she entered a room. Now powerful people discussed her as though she were impossible to ignore. The contrast was difficult to process. Days later, the official summit schedule was released. Ava Johnson would deliver the keynote address on the opening evening. Lucas Sinclair would introduce her personally. The announcement spread quickly across financial media. Industry forums erupted with speculation. Attendance requests surged. Back in Chicago, Ethan read the news article twice before setting his phone down. Then he read it a third time. Something inside him shifted. For 3 years, Ava had been a mystery. In less than 2 weeks, the entire business world would finally see her again. And for reasons he could not fully explain, Ethan suddenly knew he had to be there. New York welcomed the summit with clear skies and the kind of energy that only accompanies events expected to shape the future of entire industries. By early morning, luxury hotels around Midtown were filled with investors, executives, policymakers, and journalists from across the country. The convention center buzzed with anticipation long before the first session began. Yet one topic dominated nearly every conversation. Ava Johnson. People discussed her projects, her influence, and most of all, her absence from public view. The mystery had become part of her reputation. Ethan Walker arrived shortly after 8 o'clock, carrying his conference badge and a level of nervous anticipation he found difficult to explain. He had attended hundreds of professional events over the years. None had ever affected him like this. He told himself he was there out of curiosity. He told himself he simply wanted to understand how someone he once knew had transformed into a figure powerful enough to command national attention. Deep down, however, he knew the truth was more complicated. As the morning sessions unfolded, Ethan found himself paying little attention to the presentations. Instead, he watched conversations around him. Again and again, he heard Ava's name. One executive described her as the most influential redevelopment strategist of her generation. Another called her a visionary capable of turning struggling communities into thriving economic centers. The praise felt endless. More than once, Ethan wondered whether they were discussing the same woman who had once sat beside him on a worn sofa calculating hospital expenses and overdue bills. During lunch, Ethan overheard another conversation that immediately captured his attention. A group of investors stood near the ballroom entrance discussing Lucas Sinclair. "He rarely introduces anyone personally," one woman remarked. "If he is introducing Ava tonight, that tells you everything." Another nodded. "People underestimate how much he respects her." Ethan remained silent, but the words lingered. Respect. Years earlier, he had convinced himself that protecting his own future required leaving Ava behind. At the time, he viewed her struggles as obstacles. Now some of the most successful people in the country viewed her as an asset. The contradiction unsettled him more with every passing hour. Across the city, Ava stood in a quiet suite overlooking Central Park. Unlike the crowded convention center, the room was calm. A garment bag hung near the window. Presentation notes rested untouched on a nearby table. Ava herself stood looking out across Manhattan, watching sunlight reflect off distant skyscrapers. She felt surprisingly peaceful. 3 years earlier, returning to a setting like this would have filled her with anxiety. Too many memories. Too many reminders of who she had been. Now those memories no longer controlled her. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Lucas entered carrying 2 coffees. "I assumed you forgot to eat breakfast again," he said. Ava smiled. "Your faith in me is inspiring." He handed her a cup. "You are speaking to 1,200 people tonight." "Only 1,200? And several million more online." Ava laughed softly. Lucas studied her for a moment. "Still calm?" "Yes." "Good." He looked toward the skyline. "Because there are going to be a lot of surprised people in that room." Hours later, as evening approached, the main ballroom began filling beyond capacity. Every seat was occupied. Additional guests stood along the walls. Media crews prepared cameras. Screens illuminated the stage. Ethan sat near the center of the audience, unable to ignore the tension building inside him. Then the lights dimmed. Conversations faded. A spotlight settled on the stage as Lucas Sinclair walked toward the podium. The room erupted into applause. Lucas thanked the audience briefly before looking across the crowded ballroom. Then his expression softened into a smile. "Tonight," he said, "it is my privilege to introduce someone whose work has changed communities, transformed lives, and reminded an entire industry what leadership actually looks like." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Lucas turned toward the side entrance. "Please join me in welcoming Ava Johnson." And at that exact moment, every head in the room turned toward the same doorway. Ava Johnson stepped through the doorway, and for a moment the entire ballroom seemed to forget how to breathe. The applause began instantly, but Ethan Walker barely heard it. He could only stare. 3 years earlier, the last time he had seen Ava, she had been standing in the rain outside a church carrying grief that looked almost too heavy for one person to bear. The woman walking toward the stage now looked nothing like the version he remembered. She moved with calm confidence, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that no longer needed it. Her navy suit was elegant and understated. Her posture was relaxed. Her expression carried the quiet certainty of someone who no longer questioned her own worth. As she crossed the stage, investors, executives, and public officials rose to their feet. Ethan remained seated, frozen by the realization that every person in the room seemed to understand something he had completely missed. Lucas Sinclair stepped aside and greeted her with genuine respect. Not performative respect, not strategic respect, real respect, the kind that could not be manufactured, the kind earned over time. Ava thanked him with a warm smile before approaching the podium. The applause continued for several more seconds. Ethan noticed something strange. Nobody was applauding because of Lucas. Nobody was applauding because of her connection to powerful people. They were applauding because of her. That thought settled heavily inside him. Ava looked across the audience and began speaking. Her voice was calm, clear, and confident. She spoke about communities overlooked by traditional investment models. She spoke about economic opportunity, long-term growth, and human dignity. She shared stories about families who had opened businesses, students who had received opportunities, and neighborhoods that had regained hope. She never once mentioned herself. She never exaggerated her accomplishments. She focused entirely on the people whose lives had improved because of the work. The audience listened with complete attention. Ethan listened too. More than once he found himself remembering conversations they used to have years ago. Late-night discussions about helping communities. Dreams she once shared while sitting beside him in small apartments and crowded coffee shops. Dreams he had quietly dismissed as unrealistic. Yet here she was, standing before 1,200 industry leaders, proving that those dreams had never been unrealistic at all. They had simply required someone brave enough to pursue them. As the presentation continued, several giant screens displayed images from projects Ava had helped lead. New housing developments, community centers, small business incubators, educational programs. Every image represented lives improved because somebody chose to invest in people instead of appearances. Ethan felt increasingly uncomfortable, not because Ava was succeeding, because he suddenly realized how little he had understood her. Years ago, he believed she needed him. Looking at her now, he began to understand that she never needed saving. She only needed room to become herself. When the presentation ended, the ballroom erupted into another standing ovation. This time the applause lasted nearly a full minute. Ethan slowly rose with everyone else. Around him, people praised Ava openly. Some called her inspiring. Others called her visionary. A few described her as one of the most influential leaders in the country. Then came the moment Ethan would remember long after the summit ended. As Ava stepped away from the podium, Lucas Sinclair crossed the stage and extended his hand. She accepted it naturally, not like a subordinate, not like a business associate seeking approval, like an equal. The cameras immediately focused on them. The audience responded warmly. Ethan noticed the way Lucas looked at her. There was admiration there, trust, respect. Everything Ethan once believed could wait until success arrived. Everything Lucas seemed willing to give freely. And for the first time since the divorce, Ethan Walker felt something far more painful than regret. He felt replaced by a version of himself he should have become years ago. After the keynote session ended, the ballroom transformed into a maze of conversations, introductions, and networking opportunities. Yet despite hundreds of people moving through the room, the attention remained fixed on Ava Johnson. Executives who once would have competed for a few minutes with Lucas Sinclair now waited patiently for an opportunity to speak with her. Government officials requested meetings. Investors offered partnerships. Journalists hoped for interviews. Ava handled each interaction with the same calm professionalism she had displayed on stage. She listened carefully, thanked people sincerely, and never behaved as though success had made her more important than anyone else. Ethan Walker watched the scene unfold from across the ballroom. Years ago, he had imagined success as access to influential rooms and powerful people. Tonight he realized Ava had achieved something far rarer. She had earned genuine respect. Nobody seemed impressed by her because of wealth alone. They admired her because of what she had built and how she carried herself while building it. The realization became even harder to ignore when Ethan overheard a conversation between two investors standing nearby. "That is why people trust her," one man said. "She could have cashed out years ago." The other nodded. "Instead, she kept expanding the programs. Most people would have focused on profit. She focused on impact." Ethan looked toward Ava again. He remembered arguments from years earlier when she spoke passionately about creating opportunities in underserved communities. Back then he viewed those ideas as idealistic. Tonight those same ideas had become the foundation of an empire. Across the room, Ava was speaking with a group of city planners when Lucas joined her. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Not because he demanded attention, but because people instinctively respected his presence. Yet what caught Ethan's attention was how naturally Lucas treated Ava as an equal. He did not interrupt her. He did not dominate the conversation. When people asked questions, he often deferred to her expertise. More than once, Ethan noticed executives directing questions to Lucas only for Lucas to respond. "You should ask Ava. She understands that better than anyone." Every time it happened, the room accepted it without hesitation. Nobody appeared surprised. They already viewed her as an authority. Later in the evening, an awards presentation recognized several leaders whose projects had generated measurable social and economic improvements. When Ava's name was announced, the applause was immediate and enthusiastic. As she accepted the recognition, she thanked her team, community partners, and local leaders. She never mentioned personal sacrifice. She never discussed her struggles. She never told the audience about the funeral, the divorce, or the years spent rebuilding. Ethan understood why. Ava was no longer defining herself by what happened to her. She was defining herself by what she chose to build afterward. The thought stayed with him long after the applause ended. Near the conclusion of the reception, guests began gathering around the ballroom exits. Ava finally stepped away from the crowd for a brief moment and moved toward a quieter area near a terrace overlooking the city. Ethan saw the opportunity immediately. For several seconds, he remained frozen. Then he started walking. Each step felt strangely heavy. He had rehearsed conversations in his mind for weeks without realizing it. Questions, apologies, explanations. None of them seemed adequate anymore. Ava stood near the glass overlooking Manhattan, the city lights reflecting softly around her. She looked peaceful, not triumphant, not vindictive, simply at peace. Ethan stopped a few feet away. For the first time in 3 years, they stood face to face. Ava turned toward him slowly. Recognition appeared instantly in her eyes, followed by calm surprise. Neither spoke at first. The noise of the ballroom faded into the background. Then Ava offered a polite smile and said the words Ethan had imagined hearing for years. "Hello, Ethan." For a moment, Ethan Walker forgot every conversation he had rehearsed. Standing in front of Ava Johnson, he realized none of those carefully prepared words mattered anymore. The woman before him was no longer connected to the life he remembered. She was connected to a future he had never imagined. "Hello, Ava," he replied quietly. Ava's smile remained polite but relaxed. There was no anger in her expression, no bitterness, no visible resentment. Somehow that made the moment even more difficult. Ethan had expected distance. He had expected coldness. What he had not expected was peace. They stood near the glass overlooking Manhattan while the reception continued behind them. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly. "You look happy." Ava glanced toward the city lights before answering. "I am." The simplicity of her response struck him harder than any accusation could have. For years, he had convinced himself that people recovered from heartbreak eventually. Seeing Ava succeed was one thing. Hearing genuine contentment in her voice was something entirely different. I followed some of your work, Ethan admitted. What you have built is incredible. Ava nodded graciously. Thank you. Another silence followed. Ethan realized she was not trying to impress him. She was not seeking validation. She was simply being kind. The realization forced him to confront a truth he had spent years avoiding. I was wrong, he said finally. Ava looked at him but remained silent. Ethan continued. About a lot of things. His voice grew quieter. I thought I was choosing the future. I thought I was making the practical decision. Looking back, I think I was just afraid. Ava listened carefully. Afraid of what? Ethan gave a small laugh, without humor. Afraid of struggle. Afraid of uncertainty. Afraid of standing beside someone whose dreams seemed impossible. Ava lowered her eyes briefly. Those dreams never felt impossible to me. Ethan nodded slowly. I know that now. The city shimmered beyond the glass while memories moved through his mind. The small apartment. The hospital visits. The late-night conversations. The plans she used to describe with unwavering conviction. Plans he had dismissed because he could not see beyond immediate obstacles. I spent years thinking success would make me feel certain, he admitted. Then I came here and realized certainty was never the problem. I just failed to believe in the right person. Ava looked at him with genuine compassion. Not because she still belonged to the past they shared, but because she had grown beyond it. We were different people then, she said gently. Maybe, Ethan replied, but I still regret it. For the first time, Ava smiled warmly. Regret is not the same thing as growth. Ethan recognized the truth immediately. Before he could respond, a familiar voice approached from behind. I was wondering where you disappeared to. Lucas Sinclair joined them carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. His expression remained calm and friendly. Ava accepted one of the glasses. Thank you. Lucas glanced toward Ethan and extended his hand. Ethan Walker, right? I enjoyed your panel discussion earlier. Ethan shook his hand, surprised by the sincerity. Thank you. There was no competition in Lucas's demeanor. No insecurity. No need to establish dominance. The confidence he carried came from somewhere deeper. Ethan suddenly understood why people respected him. Lucas looked toward Ava. The car is ready whenever you are. Ava nodded. I will be right there. Ethan felt the moment slipping away. Years ago, he might have asked for another chance. Years ago, he might have searched for the perfect argument. Tonight, he understood there was nothing left to negotiate. Ava had not moved on because she found someone wealthier or more powerful. She had moved on because she finally found a life that honored her value. As Ava prepared to leave, Ethan spoke one final time. I am glad you found what you deserved. Ava's expression softened. I stopped looking for what I deserved, she replied. I started building it. Then she turned and walked beside Lucas toward the exit. Ethan remained near the glass watching them disappear into the crowd. For the first time, he understood the lesson life had spent years trying to teach him. The greatest losses are not always the opportunities we miss. Sometimes they are the people who believed in a future long before we could see it ourselves. And as the lights of Manhattan reflected across the windows, Ethan finally accepted that the woman he left behind had become the woman he could never catch again.